This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, with agriculture broadcaster Orion Samuelson and yours truly, Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. Coming up on this weekend's broadcast, it's not the meeting season this year, but it's a season of decision. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our broadcast of This Week in Agribusiness. Armstrong in the studio with Pearson.
Glad to see you back in the studio, Max. I tell you what, you hit the nail on the head. This is a time of year for decisions for growers. And if we're going to have a cold snap, it might as well be now, and we got a lot of work to do in the office.
Well, you don't think about that. This is the time when everything's locked down. We've had a lot of snows in the heartland. Most have, anyway. And there are so many things to be considering right now, especially with the way everything has shifted in Washington. That's changed a lot of the decisions for farmers.
It has. Between this rally that we've seen and the change in administration in D.C., some things have changed and some stay the same. Got to remind folks, your election for ARC or PLC has to be made by March 15th. So let's weigh those options on our farms given this price move.
Key farm program decisions that have to be made every year at about this time under the current farm law. But something that isn't written into law or hasn't been, the changes that are pending in Washington in terms of taxation. And many of those have very significant long-term planning decisions for farming operations.
Absolutely, Max. We're hearing lots of conversations about changes perhaps to the estate tax, about potential changes in the way basis gets stepped up when you're passing a farm or a business from one generation to the next. And I think all of those things are definitely worth talking to an accountant and an attorney about on your operation.
It has sent a chill through some of those folks out on farms and ranches. To be sure, you could see it in the social media over the past couple of weeks. Now, whether or not in the end it all turns out the way that they've talked about, who knows? But farmers have to be thinking about the what if and planning for it.
Absolutely. And as well, of course, the year has ended. Tax time is upon us. We've got to be prepared to get all of our monies into Uncle Sam. This is a great time to get some of that work done.
And then, of course, there are the various programs that have been put in place because of the pandemic. I think there are some PPP opportunities for farmers, but it's very detailed, very complex. They're having to have some very serious decisions about that.
They are. And I would say in my conversation with folks who are plugged into these programs, your best resources for PPP are your lender, and in a lot of cases a commercial lender at the bank or lending institution you work with, or accountants. Both of those folks have been well versed on what these programs offer.
What's been interesting is many of these rural bankers have been prepared to just swing into action here, and I guess it's because they stay so close with their customer base out there. These bankers in the farming communities are always in contact with that grower to know what's going on out there. And the farmer, of course, needs to be communicating on a regular basis with that lender.
That's true, Max. This is that time of year for communication. And usually we get our communicating out of the way at trade shows and at farm events. But this year, it's a little different.
This has been very different. And the other day I posed the question on Twitter, what are you missing by not being able to go to the National Farm Machinery Show that it would have been held this past week, starting on a Wednesday, and then they backed up the date. They moved it to the end of March, beginning of April. Then they eventually canceled the show. But you really noticed the growers missed it so much. Yeah. Some were joking about the fact they had to be home now for Valentine's Day. This was going to be different for them. Some of them missed just dining along the way, stopping at a Cracker Barrel with buddies that they did every year. Right. And then the opportunity to really talk about a new service they wanted to purchase, a new piece of equipment, to visit one-on-one with exhibitors.
And get the hands-on experience. That's where these shows really have an advantage, Max, and we're finding ways to work around it in 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have the Farm Progress virtual experience. We show equipment each weekend here on our show, and then there are the market considerations that come along too at the same time.
Well, Max, if farmers were at trade shows this season, no doubt they'd be talking about this grain market rally. This past week, we had the USDA release their February World Agriculture Supply and Demand estimates and kind of took the market for a little bit of surprise. To help us understand what's going on, Matt Bennett from agmarket.net has joined us. And Matt, we saw the USDA release their supply and demand estimates. We saw corn exports raised 50 million bushels and ending stocks come down to 1.5 billion. But the trade seems a little bummed out by that. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, the trade estimates were probably another 100 million bushel below, what the actual USDA number came in at. I think maybe what the trade's really a little more perplexed and frustrated with is, you saw these huge Chinese purchases a couple weeks ago, 240 million bushels or so. Other purchases as well. Last week I think we posted like a 7.4 million metric ton, which was as of the previous week, all in 1 week, largest ever by a landslide. And so most people, including myself, felt the USDA would lend credence to the fact that we saw those huge sales, maybe raise exports 150, ish. But bottom line, we thought that the carry out would come down more than 50 million bushels. Last month they took 250 out for demand, and I felt like they'd bring a fair amount of that back in, and they just didn't do much of that at all.
Well, and Matt, I know it's always tough to sort of read the tea leaves when we're talking USDA reports, but do you get the feeling that maybe they're just hedging their bets a little bit on expectations that China will cancel some of these orders?
Yeah, I think that maybe not even just cancel, but at least roll some of them to next marketing year, I think is an understandable thing to think. But you've got to ask yourself, what's the logistics of getting all this corn shipped? We happen to feel like it can get shipped. It's just a matter of, you hope that you don't have any froze river systems or the water levels don't get too low. If you can keep things running, I think we can still export, in that 275, 2.8 range as far as corn's concerned. And so, a fair amount more than what the USDA is currently suggesting. But at the same time, I think, high prices cure high prices type scenario. The USDA is probably looking towards that as well, in that they showed demand coming off just a little bit for some other countries. As China, they had to say that it was coming up. So a very interesting report all the way around.
Yeah, it certainly was. And another one of the numbers that really jumped out at me was soybean ending stocks. USDA reported them at 120 million bushels. Boy, that's down a lot from the billion bushels we were considering here just not that long ago, Matt.
Yeah, just a year ago, I remember being at, for instance, speaking at Top Producer Seminar last year, you were talking to some folks that thought we'd be 1.1 billion bushels. And I mean, that's just 1 year ago. And now we're looking at essentially pipeline numbers. And so 120 million off 20 from last month. But it's interesting because there's been years in the past that the USDA has gotten to around 150 and said, you know what, that's as low as what we're going to go. That's not what they said this time around. We're at 120. And I think most folks, including myself, think that, we're probably going to run extremely tight, maybe even run out of soybeans. I think imports will have to be bumped up later on. Logistically, it's tough to get beans imported, but I think you're going to have to import beans sometime next summer. And part of the reason is because we're exporting more beans on the front end due to the fact that Brazil's coming online a little later than what most people expected.
Well, Matt, I mean, we're talking about running out of soybeans, certainly down at pipeline supply, and yet old crop prices can't really maintain much momentum above 14 bucks. What's it going to take to sustain the kind of price movement to keep this market between 14 and 15?
Well, Mike, we've become a just-in-time delivery system, and so I think most people are sitting here saying, you know what, South America is going to come online. We're going to have enough beans to get us by, but you've got to ask yourself, are we going to have enough acres here in the U.S. To keep us from running pipeline numbers? Are we gonna be able to count on just monster production? Argentina's got their issues as well, and so there's no question that $14 looks cheap when you look at stocks to use ratio, and you could certainly make the case for the market rallying on up further. But at the same time, if we're talking to predominantly producers here, you got to ask yourself, what incentive do you have getting bullish at $14 beans? And so, sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. And, if the market falls off 50 cents after a $5, $6 rally, I don't want to get too worked up over that.
All right. Well, we'll be back. We'll dig into that acreage question here with Matt Bennett from agmarket.net when we come back. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by the Soybean Checkoff. Tips, videos, how-tos, and more. If it has to do with ag tech, you'll find it in the Tech Tool Shed, your unbiased one-stop resource. We're talking markets with Matt Bennett from agmarket.net. And Matt, you mentioned the questions that are currently being raised in the market about acreage expectations heading into the 2021 growing season. As things are setting up right now, what's your take, what's your numbers here on the acreage mix for this next year?
Yeah, I mean, most folks are saying 180-ish, for total combined acres on corn and soybeans. I guess you got to ask yourself a few questions here. At what point would you exceed that? And I think it would be a year where profit margins look rather stout. You got to think some of these prevent plant acres are going to be coming back into the mix. But at the same time, milo and sorghum, wheat, cotton, several of these crops are actually trying to stake their claim, to hold on to some acres, if not build a few acres. So right now, I'm probably looking at 181 to 2 being our maximum as far as combined corn and soybean acres. Right now, ag market is around 92 and a quarter on corn acres. So, that puts us around 90 on soybean acres. I think that we're a little bit closer on corn and bean acres maybe than what some folks are. And part of the reason for that is I think any swing acres that you've got this year, you've got to understand fertilizer costs have risen dramatically. And you look over at that ratio on beans to corn and you're running a pretty healthy 2.6 to 1. It's pretty tough to say, I want to go ahead and plant corn whenever fertilizer costs are where they're at. So at this stage of the game, I think that your acreage will probably be fairly close with corn and soybeans.
Well, and of course, before we really get the planters rolling, we're going to have beans coming out of South America, and we'll probably have a little better handle on the corn they're going to put in the ground down there. What's your read on the South American bean crop? USDA didn't adjust it. They're still at roughly 130 million metric tons for their beans. What do you think?
Yeah, I think with Brazil, I can kind of go along with maybe keeping them the same. As far as Argentina is concerned, I felt like you could probably cut a little bit. Whenever you look at their good to excellent ratings in Argentina, they're certainly having some issues in certain parts of the country. Now, the safrinha crop, that's the big one for me. So you put the safrinha crop in the ground just a little bit late, and we know there's parts of Brazil that are really struggling to get soybeans out due to the fact that they went from a drier pattern to a wetter pattern. And so moving forward, if you get that safrinha crop in the ground late, hey, you know what? You're going to run into some dry season towards the end of the growing season for them. If you get into your reproductive time frame, and it's dry, it's not something that you want to see. So there's a lot of questions on that safrinha crop yet. But I agree with you. A lot of what goes on in South America is probably going to be factoring into some really late season decisions as far as your crop mix for corn and beans.
Well, now let's take a look over at the livestock markets. The cattle feeder in this country has just been buffeted for the past year between COVID and now skyrocketing feed costs. We've seen a little bit of a step back this year, a little break in the corn market after this WASDE report. Matt, how aggressive should folks be in getting some feed needs secured going out through the rest of the summer?
I think feeders for a lot of folks have looked reasonably priced, but at the same time, you got to ask, why are they reasonably priced? Well, because feed costs are where they're at. And so, you get a little bit of a break here. And so if I'm buying feeders and I'm looking on farther out, and once I get past this high cash price for corn, in my opinion, you got to at least look pretty closely. I don't want to lock in too much of one side and not lock in the other. So if I'm buying feeders, I really need to lock in some feed costs, because the chance for an explosive corn market, especially, or soybean market for that matter, is certainly there here for 21. When you're looking at carryout levels where we're at for beans, as tight as what we've been this time of year ever, or 3% or under, and on corn, 10% and change. But let's face it, a lot of us are under 10% right now. Those stocks to use ratios don't suggest to me that feed costs are going to get any cheaper, especially if you see a major weather issue this summer.
Yeah, there could be a lot of headlines and a lot of volatility ahead of us, Mr. Bennett. Is that kind of your take on what could be down the road?
Absolutely. I think that the volatility could be unprecedented. We've seen a ton of volatility here in the last several months. As a producer, I've got to keep in mind what that means for me. A lot of times, though, it creates opportunity. I think as a producer, though, a lot of times we get fooled into thinking that high prices are just going to continue forever. And so while we may be very volatile, that doesn't mean we're going to go up. We've got to be very cautious in thinking that we're just going to continue higher every day.
Fantastic. Grab those opportunities when they come. Thanks for talking with us. Matt Bennett, agmarket.net.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform. Combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Chad Colby leads us to all kinds of technology. This one might surprise you, Mr. Mike. He's talking about keeping warm in the wintertime. Not you, not yourself, your equipment. Here's Chad's report this week.
Are you annoyed at all at just how cold the inside of your semi, your wheel loader, or your tractor is? Hi everyone, I'm Chad Colby. On this week's tech segment, I wanted to share with you something a little interesting that I had purchased for my airplane, but realized in this cold weather, it might honestly have some other pretty interesting applications. You can see that little heater right there on the tailgate of my truck. Fits really easily in the floor of my airplane, and that's what it was basically designed for. It's a cabin class heater. It's waterproof. It is also certified to be used in areas where combustibles might be present. You can see here with the thermal gun, there's a fair amount of heat coming out of the top of that thing. It is safe to touch, of course. But what I liked about it is you can see the difference it makes. We're outside the airplane there, it was 50 degrees, but inside the plane, after a little bit of time, it was plenty warm enough. With the extreme cold temperatures here this last week and the coming weeks, I took this device over to a friend of mine who has a bunch of semis, and we talked about that application where instead of leaving the truck run, hey, a guy can just throw this device inside the floor of the truck and keep it nice and warm. This device is 1,000 watts. It does have a thermostat. When you order the machine, you can have that set however you want. I like the fact there's no buttons and switches. Nothing you can screw up. You just plug it in. I have it set to come on at 50 degrees and turn off at 70. The price of this unit's a little over $300. They do make some in some other sizes. Did you notice that drop cord? How handy is that? It's got a 40-foot drop cord. And I've used other products from this company for years, and they work really, really well. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
When I watch Mr. Colby's segments, it makes me want one of those. I'm not sure I have a ready use for it immediately, but I want one.
Absolutely. So, man, a lot of this technology he shows would look good in my vehicle or elsewhere. But I tell you, there's a lot of parts of agriculture that are looking for the next wave, the next heat, and cattle feeders are one of them. Well, at the Iowa Ag Expo, we talked with folks in the cattle feeding industry. Stick with us.
Well, this time of the year, especially with the weather that we've had across a wide expanse of the country and with that cold shoved so far south, there's a lot of shop time, and farmers, ranchers taking advantage of this opportunity to work inside as much as they can. Oh, it's calving season too, I guess, starting for many, isn't it?
It is. I've seen a lot of folks on Twitter talking about their calving season and talking about the struggles they're facing this year with the cold, with the freezing temps, and the snow that just keeps coming, Max. I bet they wish they were in their shop maybe doing some annual maintenance on a machine.
Every calving season, you'll see one in a bathtub. You know, one in the house, one in the kitchen somewhere.
Yeah. Curled up in the laundry room. That's what always happens. But for folks that are out in their shops, we're doing that annual maintenance. Maybe there are some things we can do on top of our regular maintenance to really move things to the next level.
When you're working out there, hopefully over that heated floor, or you'll build a building eventually that has one, you may be thinking about keeping that machinery running as long as you possibly can. And that can lead to an evaluation of the fluids, the oil, the lubricants overall on that piece of equipment. Chad Colby has some guidance on that he shares.
Maintenance is such a high priority in aviation. That kind of goes without saying. A typical service interval on a small Cessna aircraft is about 50 hours, depending on how that airplane's equipped. Now, obviously, you're going to pay close attention to how that engine is running, but what a lot of aviators have done over the last several years, and it's no secret, they pull oil samples and have those sent off. It's a pretty easy process. You grab a little bit of oil, put in a container, and you mail it off, and within about a week, you get the results back. And when you look at those results, you're looking for everything to be in the green, if you would. The nice part is you can compare it to the previous ones as well. In agriculture, the process is really no different. I've noticed over the last several years, fluid scanning is becoming a lot more popular. It's a simple process. Go to the parts counter at your favorite ag dealer. You can get those scanning kits right over the counter. Costs vary, I would say less than $100. You'll fill out the necessary paperwork that goes with it, serial number, engine hours, and so forth, and then you'll go through the process of pulling the samples. Obviously, engine oil is a big one. There is a service as well if you want your filters inspected. You'll pull the coolant out of the tractor and so forth. Obviously, anything that's running in fluid can be tested. Transmission fluid, hydraulic oil, etc. Once that's done, you'll simply package up the fluids and send them off and finish the maintenance on your tractor. Wait about a week and you'll get those results back. And similar to aviation, it allows you to compare those results with previous sampling just to see how your tractor's doing. It's a great peace of mind as you enter the next busy season on your farm.
So if I followed Chad correctly there, you get that first evaluation, you get a benchmark to see how the lubricants are doing in that piece of equipment, and then you can compare with subsequent tests that you do season after season if you want to try to get as many seasons as you possibly can out of that equipment.
Well, and with the dollars that we're spending on a lot of this farm equipment nowadays, it makes sense to know as minutely as possible what's happening inside that engine.
Oh, what's a new combine cost these days? You include the Hedge, you go north of $1 million, right?
Absolutely. Let's keep that stuff maintained.
Keep it going.
And we're not just spending a lot on equipment, we're spending a lot on technology. A few weeks ago, Chad gave us a piece on how to update and maintain the upgrades on your Apple technology. We got a lot of questions. A lot of folks were curious about maintaining that stuff, so we wanted to bring that piece to you one more time. Be sure to take notes.
Are you considering upgrading your new phone or maybe just updating the software? Hi everyone, I'm Chad Colby, and I can't tell you how many people over the last couple months have handed me their smart device and say, hey Chad, can you update this? Is all my software current? So this week, I wanted to show you a couple things. Number one, I wanted to show you how to set the automation up to do automated backups so all your data is protected on your tablet or your smartphone. And the second thing is I want to show you how you can check in your device to make sure it has the most latest software, which is very important as we all become more dependent on some of those great apps that we use every day. So let me show you how to do these two important steps. The first being backup. So I'm going to use the iPad for example, just because it's a little easier than a phone. I'm going to go to Settings. I'm going to click on my name. You can see it right here, Chad Colby. I'm going to go click on iCloud, and then I'm going to scroll down and hit iCloud Backup. Now what I want you to notice here is I have that turned on. You can also hit the button Backup Now. Both of those features will only work if you're connected to Wi-Fi. Once you know that is done, you know everything on your device is protected, it's backed up. You go down to General and look for Software Update. Click on that and you can see my software on this device is up to date. I also have the automated updates turned on. It's a really simple process and I encourage you to keep your device current. If you have more questions, check out apple.com and up in the right-hand corner, there's a button for support. And then underneath where it says, Welcome to Apple Support, you can type in backup there and get a lot more details on how to do it step by step. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Well, thanks, Chad, but you know, a lot of us are Android users and we still don't know what we're doing. So give us an update on that, Mr. Colby.
Oh, you're a troublemaker. You know he doesn't know his way around an Android. Somebody's got to tell him we were talking about him. He's going to realize that. He's going to call me up. He'll say, Max, the next time you need advice on technology, pooey.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to take my call after that.
There's more coming up on this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. Greg Solier's weather is just ahead. Stay with us here.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. We're talking about the importance of this season. It's generally farm show season, not this year. It's an important season for key business decisions. Oh, it's calving season and cattle hedging season.
It sure is. Max had the chance while at the Iowa Ag Expo to talk with Scott Hodney of Producers Livestock about how they managed their hedges this last year and what they're looking for going forward.
When we're trading cattle, really and truly, the only thing we're looking at is the basis. if it's a positive or negative basis. And we have a 10-year basis chart every 15 days that is kind of my Bible to market cattle with. And I'm looking at that saying, hey, we're above the normal basis or below the normal basis. And lately in the last month, we've had a very negative basis. And so our hedge guys are kind of holding cattle, waiting for this basis to come together. And if it doesn't come together next week, we can start delivering cattle. And we are definitely not afraid to deliver cattle to the Board of Trade. In fact, I enjoy doing it because it keeps everything honest.
It does. That's one of the ways the market inspires transparency is you get the actual product.
That's right. And in 15, I marketed 80 loads to Worthing, South Dakota, the month of October, and then about another 40 in December. So I am not afraid to do it. And now we have West Point, Nebraska available to us, which is really a benefit too. And so it's closer for me to go to West Point with most of mine.
So, Scott, with the producers you've worked with, I mean, you see these cattle from really start to finish, coming off the grass, going into the yards, and then hopefully being marketed. And this past year was a big challenge for a lot of cattle feeders as their marketing opportunities dried up with COVID.
Absolutely. Couple things that happened. Number one, the big time, most of the time of the year, your prime season to hedge cattle for the whole year is the February 15th to March 10th area. I always say, whatever you do, have them hedged by the 10th and no later than the 15th. Well, this year that was right when COVID hit, and it just killed us. And so we didn't get a lot of cattle hedged that we would have otherwise. So that's one thing. Then the second thing was with the plants going down, just getting cattle in on a timely basis. And we had a little more pull on that than the average producer just because we do market a lot of cattle. I'm not saying I could get everybody in. I had a lot of people that were calling me because they knew I was getting cattle scheduled, but they weren't a customer. Well, I'm sorry to say I had to take care of the people that take care of me all the time first.
Also had the chance to catch up with Jeff Longnecker of Longnecker Fertilizers and a cattle feeder from Iowa about his experience this past year and what his expectations are for feed costs in 2021.
Hopefully they all pre-bought their corn. I know that's what we did, but we're going to be short a little bit. And it looks like we're going to probably pay $5.40, $5.50 for some corn, and we have to. That's definitely going to cut into the small profit margin there already is there. This cattle thing really since 16 has been very tough. It's been a hit and miss. A lot of guys, as I travel the country, I feedlots, I know where they were, where they have been for years. A lot of them, there's not a hoof in there.
Empty lots, and an empty pen is a position, Jeff.
Yes, that's right. And the cattle feeder in general is an older person. And, you know, as you get older, gosh, do I want to risk $1 million every 6 months to a year, you know. I see a lot of that changing, heading more toward the big feedlots.
Thanks to those guys for talking to us, and hopefully 2021 turns out to be a better year than 2020 for our friends in the cattle feeding industry.
Now, agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier brings us his farm weather forecast for the nation for the week ahead. It's presented by Pivot BioProven, the nitrogen-producing microbes that stay put, whether or not.
As we visit with Greg Solier about that forecast, one phrase comes to mind: misery loves company. And that really applies this weekend, doesn't it?
Yeah, certainly the story. Boy, we had such a lackadaisical winter season up to the past couple of weeks, and boy, we have made up for it in a hurry. And even that cold, which has dominated the heartland down to Dixie, Gulf Coast and points to the east, retrograding, backing up to the west into parts of Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. The storminess of the past couple of weeks abating somewhat. Just a string of disturbances kind of along the periphery of the cold, and here it is, down double digits, 20, 30 degrees below zero in some spots. Actual air temperatures under the midst of that high pressure. The bitter cold will relax some, move up across the southern Canadian prairie, still well below average here. Next weather system and a bit of snow coming in, hopefully where we need some of it, into the western Dakotas, back into the Nebraska Panhandle. The chill is back in through Northern California. Pretty quiet Washington State, a little round of rain and maybe some Northern Sierra mountain snow expected by week's end. There is a freeze potential here into the northern valleys of California. San Joaquin Valley frost frost potential. Here's this cold front driving the cold air and a trough moving through the Four Corners area. We will put some additional snow back into parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and push that rain snow line ever so farther to the south, and maybe ensconced in that some of South Texas citrus with time. Milder air somewhat, and the next weather system into the valleys of California. New storm system, new moisture. I know it's snow and ice, but it comes into play across the central and southern high plains as the cold weather and cold wave continues locked in from the plains on eastward.
You're shoving that fairly far south, aren't you? I noticed on the snow cover map the other day, right over western North and South Dakota, there's a gap in there. And my friend Robert, who farms in that area, says it's been about 15 years since it was that open in that area.
Yeah, for this time of the year. Earlier on in the winter time season, we had some snow, but remember those Chinook winds, those 60-degree readings prior to 30 below certainly helped to eradicate some of that snowpack and snow cover. So as usual, we've got to watch for winter kill in one form or another across the Plain States areas, and that sub-zero cold all the way down past Kansas, western Corn Belt, lake snows into the eastern Corn Belt. By the middle and late parts of the week, slightly milder, not warmer, milder air across the western complex. The chill continues into the eastern Corn Belt. Maybe some snow as well for those areas lacking snow cover into the high plains. And speaking of snow, here it is, maybe as far south as northern Mexico. We do see the potential for some freeze conditions underway now and early on into the week, with the next weather system bringing showers and thunderstorms to the Delta region. New low pressure out of the western Gulf brings the cold air even farther to the south. Freeze potential in this corridor behind that weather system, and a new moisture maker for some of the drought-ridden areas. It's rain and snow, but we'll take the moisture on the southern plains.
My, all you need to do is throw in a nor'easter. You're not going to do that, are you?
No, we've had a couple of those, and that certainly has helped with the dryness and drought in that part of the country. Remnant low pressure here with some snow shower and flurry activity. Here's the cold wave across much of the Corn Belt. Frigid weather and just dangerous wind chills. Use care and caution. Livestock certainly involved as well. The next weather system has slightly milder air, still well below average temperatures across the rest of the Corn Belt. The bitter cold locked in the St. Lawrence River Valley, along with lake snows and accumulations there. Southeastern part of the country, it's a cold wave into Texas and Oklahoma, and perhaps as far south as South Texas citrus. A couple of snowflakes mixed on in. Plenty of moisture and ice potential too across parts of Dixie, along with frost and freeze potential, with winter sunshine back in late by week's end. More moisture late in the week for parts of Oklahoma and Texas.
Now Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country. Presented by Pivot Bio Proven. Visit pivotbio.com to find a representative near you.
Well, his teasing the forecast was ugly. Let's get the details and see how ugly they are. Precipitation. Now, we do need some. We need to make up some moisture in the wintertime.
That's right. Typically, it's before we have frozen the grounds, certainly rock solid. So at least we'll put some snow cover down. There will be some ice as well. And look at how far south the freezing rain aspect goes as well. But at least some moisture in some of the worst drought-ridden areas, including some snowfall here across parts of the western Dakotas. Some of the certainly windward-facing mountain slopes will get substantial moisture here, but it's along the deep south mid-Atlantic region. There's ice potential, snow potential, upwards of an inch. Of course, it's that dry, powdery snow that we've seen of late. Should melt it down to maybe a quarter inch across parts of the western Corn Belt, southern Great Lakes region. That cold wave still locked up to the north. Little, if any, organized precipitation there.
Well, to wrap up the month, show us some love, pal. Give us a little warmth.
I'll see what I can do. It does not look too good here. The lobe of the cold, this big polar vortex, which is typically this time of the year here, moves back to where it ought to be this time of the year. But look at the swath of below average temperatures. Washington State all the way down to Florida, including frost and freeze potential. A little sliver of warmth, melting maybe some of the snow and ice and frost and freeze into South Texas. Below average precip here. An active weather pattern across parts of the Dakotas. Good news there. More snow for the Great Lakes and eastern Corn Belt and into the Northeast and New England. Busy weather pattern winding out of the month of February.
As we start the month of March, I'm reminded how stormy it can be. And I noticed that temperature differential on your map.
That's
right.
What does
it look like in March?
We could be looking at a pretty busy severe weather season as well, Max, but still some winter time to go. Here is the cold air, the bitter cold locked here, still well below average. Not much of a pattern shift. The trough across the middle part of the country. Some warmth back into the valleys of California, Texas, and normal down through Florida. Again, weather systems come ashore, Pacific Northwest. Note the absence typical of La Nina. Into California, the winter storm season, I think, is winding down already, but plenty of it to go across the northern half of the country. Precipitation about normal in the southeastern sections of the country.
And for the week of March 8th, will we start to see some warming?
We should across the Ohio Valley reaches the southeastern part of the country, but note how we buckle the jet stream back westward and look at that cold air. Not done with wintertime or spring or winter storminess across the northern and central Rockies, Plain States, Corn Belt, and points out of the east. Still drying out across much of the desert southwest. It will be an active month of March and April across the country.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
The work goes on this time of the year with some of those old tractors with the help of the cabet, the heat houser, the windbreaker, whatever you call it. There's some warmth coming back toward the operator. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store-Lock Tool Cabinets. Clearly the best quality tool cabinet you'll ever buy. See what they can do for you and the array of colors they have at StoreLock.com. Well, it can be brutal on mornings or evenings like these, and if you've got that old tractor out there working, you need a little bit of comfort. And Jim Erickson in Wisconsin has found that with his old International 656. Yeah, you've got that cape along the side that brings the heat back toward the operator, and so it keeps you a little bit warm back there as it funnels the heat from that operating engine. With a blade at the back of that 656 made in 1969, Jim moved the snow last winter, but the tractor has since been retired to tractor ride duty, he told me. Oh, that would be a great tractor for rides. The 656, made in 1969 by International, looking great with or without the windbreaker at Ettrick, Wisconsin. Well, let's find out where in America Mark Stock is this weekend. Wait a minute, he's checking in live from out there in the snow, but it does look like a field of green behind him as he brings us that report from Big Iron.
Hello, Max. Nick and Lisa Hatcher have their retirement sale on February 17th on BigIron.com. A great opportunity, folks, to buy quality equipment on the Nick and Lisa Hatcher Farm Machinery Retirement Sale in Liberal, Kansas. Check out the combines, late model John Deere S680 machines. There's a pair of them. They've got four-wheel drive John Deere tractors, some track tractors, some mechanical front tractors, 10 tractors altogether. Plus, they've got a John Deere 54-row 20-inch planter on a DB90 toolbar. They've got a John Deere 1895 air seeder with a 1910 cart. They've got a pair of Brent grain carts that will be selling. Plus, they've got John Deere 640 flex draper and two 18-row 20-inch corn heads, some really nice hay equipment, and a fleet of 8 Peterbilt 379 semi-truck tractors and some Wilson grain trailers. Check out this auction in Liberal, Kansas, conducted February the 17th on BigIron.com.
Good people that have worked for us over the years. Great community.
Very blessed.
Very blessed to have and seen and done what we've done. So thank you.
The FFA Chapter Tribute is sponsored by Nationwide, the #1 farm insurer in the country. To register your FFA chapter, go to nationwidesupportsffa.com. That's nationwidesupportsffa.com. Nationwide, we stand for you.
Well, we're excited to continue our salute to the FFA program, and this week we are talking to the state president of the Iowa FFA, Michaela McGill from Southern Iowa. Michaela, what got you into FFA so many years ago?
Well, I kind of have a unique FFA story, actually. So I started with 4-H when I was in 4th grade, and I've always loved raising cattle, and I specialized with bottle calves. However, when I got to high school, I actually didn't plan on joining FFA. I was in band and choir and sports, and I figured that would take up most of my time. However, I learned that our band required us to do a summer band camp that fell the same week as our county fair. So I ended up dropping band during the summer, and I was placed in an ag class. And then when we got into the high school and got going through classes, I decided that I wanted to try some of the arts programs and actually went to drop this ag class. But I had missed the drop date, so they wouldn't let me out of the class. And that was just kind of one of those like spur of the moment things that happened, and I was placed in the program, and my FFA advisor kind of pushed me to do creed speaking. And after I did creed speaking, everything just kind of fell into place. I found my love for FFA, my passion for speaking, and really kind of found my place in this organization.
And you've continued to climb your way up in this organization, working in a very challenging year as state president. Michaela, this has been a challenge. Are you excited to see things go back to normal?
Yes, it has definitely been a challenge. One of the things we do in Iowa is our state president always comes from the team before. That way they have the opportunity and they know all the events. But this year I was seeing everything from a completely different perspective, which was kind of nerve-wracking. So I'm excited to see everything go back to normal.
Fantastic. Michaela McGill, state president of the Iowa FFA.
Now, Samuelson Says. Insight and commentary from Orion Samuelson.
Oh, it was a very cold week in my part of the world because winter finally arrived, and I'm sure it did for many of you. So I spent most of my time indoors reading letters from you responding to the questions I asked in Samuelson Says a week ago. I don't have time to share all of the letters I received, but quotes from some of them. First of all, on American voters voting to change things. Do they or don't they? One writer said that's exactly what happened in November. And a letter writer from Iowa who said, as for term limits in Congress, I agree we should have them, as I am sure the majority of Americans would too. But since Congress is the one that would have to create term limits through legislation, why would any of these power-hungry politicians pass a law that would state they could only be in the job for 6, 10, or 15 years? And as far as Congress proceeding with impeachment of President Donald Trump, it's because he served only one term. And if he is found guilty in the Senate impeachment trial, that would prohibit him from running for president again. That's why we need to conduct the impeachment trial, even though President Trump is no longer in office. There were a lot of other ideas shared with me too, and I thank you for that. I may quote some more of them in the future, but some good responses to the political world we live in today. Meanwhile, this coming week, if it doesn't warm up, stay warm. I plan to. My thoughts on Samuelson Says.
Well, if you are craving that farm show experience and you don't quite want to wait until the Farm Progress Show comes back around in person later on this year, the virtual experience continues. This week, we're taking a look at some tillage equipment from Case IH.
The Case IH Speed Tiller 475 high-speed compact disc. A true dual-season tillage tool. The Case IH Speed Tiller high-speed disc digs like a disc and finishes like a finisher, maximizing the agronomic quality of the seed bed from surface to floor, fall or spring. This tillage tool is designed to cut, size, and incorporate high levels of crop residue to improve soil quality and maximize crop yields. A key agronomic feature that sets this high-speed disc apart is the exclusive indexed, independently mounted blades that are laterally adjustable in order to work the entire soil profile. Proper blade indexing and backside pressure effectively eliminate the ridges and grooves below the soil surface, contributing to a smoother subsurface floor and more consistent uniform seed emergence. The robust disc arm assembly, wing flex torsion rubbers, and frame make this machine highly productive and effective in the harshest of soil conditions, as well as a variety of crop conditions, from prevent plant to corn and bean residue to vegetable, cotton, and other specialty crops by thorough tilling of the soil while cultivating weeds, aerating the soil, and mixing the residue. The Speed Tiller high-speed disc is available in two models, the Speed Tiller 465 rigid-mounted or Speed Tiller 475 trailing configuration. Working widths range from 5 feet to 41 feet.
Incredible technology. To see all those videos from the virtual experience, hit up farmprogressshow.com. And Max, it'll be here before we know it.
The next edition will be coming up in about 190 days or so, just a little more than 6 months. So the countdown is underway.
That's right. Time will fly.
We look forward to seeing you next weekend right here, whether we're together in the studio or together on the screen coming into your home. Thanks for joining us each week. So long, everyone.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.